The lantern swung through the dark rain like a death sentence. Alara pressed her back against the cold wood of the stranger's cabin, her wedding dress torn and muddy, her father's furious voice still echoing in her skull. She'd run from an arranged marriage straight into the home of the most dangerous man in Red Hollow, Harley Crow, the rancher nobody dared to name out loud. Outside, thunder cracked like gunfire. Inside, footsteps approached. She'd chosen the storm over submission. Now she'd have to face whatever came next. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The rain started 3 hours before Alara Vance made the worst decision of her life. It began as a whisper against the windows of her father's ranch house. Soft, almost gentle. By the time the sun disappeared behind the canyon ridge, it had turned mean. The kind of rain that erased roads, swallowed fence lines, and made even experienced riders second-guess their routes home. Alara stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, staring at the white dress her father had ordered from Dallas. Lace collar, pearl buttons, expensive enough to make a statement to everyone in Red Hollow. Gerald Vance's daughter was marrying up. She hated everything about it. Alara, her father's voice carried up the stairs, sharp as a cattle brand. Get down here. Silas is waiting. Silas Granger. 52 years old, owner of the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, and the man her father had decided she would marry. They'd announced it at the church social 2 weeks ago, and Alara hadn't been consulted once. She touched the dress fabric, felt the stiff, expensive material under her fingertips, and knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't do it. The window was already open. She'd planned this for days, ever since her father had shaken Silas's hand over Sunday dinner, and talked about her like she was livestock being traded. She'd hidden riding clothes under her bed, packed a small bag with what little money she'd saved, memorized the canyon trails well enough to ride them in the dark. But she hadn't counted on the storm. Thunder rolled across the valley as Alara climbed through the window, her boots hitting the wet grass with a soft thud. Rain immediately soaked through her coat. She ran toward the barn, keeping low, praying her father was too busy entertaining Silas to notice her absence yet. The barn smelled like hay and horse sweat. Her mare, Bess, nickered softly from her stall, sensing something wrong. Alara's hands shook as she saddled the horse, not from cold, but from the reality of what she was doing. Running away meant losing everything. Her home, her family, any protection her father's name had ever given her, but staying meant losing herself. She led Bess out through the back entrance, mounted quickly, and rode hard toward the canyon pass. Behind her she heard shouting. Her father had discovered the empty room. The rain turned vicious. Within 20 minutes, Alara could barely see 10 feet ahead. The trail she'd memorized in daylight became a twisting nightmare of mud and shadow. Bess stumbled twice, spooked by lightning that cracked so close Alara could smell the ozone. She'd planned to reach the stage road, follow it east to the next county, find work in a town where nobody knew Gerald Vance's name. Simple, clean. But the storm had other plans. The canyon pass was flooded. Water rushed through the narrow gap like a river, carrying debris and loose rock. Alara pulled Bess to a halt, her heart sinking. There was no way through. Not tonight. Maybe not for days. She turned the horse around, trying to think. Going back wasn't an option. Her father would lock her in that room, post guards, and make sure she walked down the aisle, even if he had to drag her. East was blocked. West led deeper into the wilderness. North looped back toward town. South. South led to Thornwell Ranch, Harley Crow's land. Alara had never seen the man up close. Nobody in Red Hollow had, not in years. He lived alone beyond the ridge, in a house people only mentioned in warnings. Stories about him varied. Some said he'd killed a man in a land dispute. Others claimed he'd gone half mad from isolation. The only thing everyone agreed on was simple. Stay away from Harley Crow. Another crack of thunder. Bess reared, nearly throwing Alara from the saddle. She didn't have a choice. She turned south. The ride took another hour through rain so thick it felt like riding underwater. Alara's clothes were soaked through, her fingers numb on the reins. Twice she almost turned back, fear winning over desperation. But then she'd picture Silas Granger's weathered hands reaching for her, her father's satisfied smile, and she'd push forward. When she finally saw the light, she almost cried. It was faint, just a single window glowing gold through the darkness, but it meant shelter, warmth. a chance to wait out the storm before figuring out her next move. Alara dismounted on shaking legs and led Bess toward what looked like a barn. The structure was well maintained, she noticed, roof solid, doors straight. Not the abandoned wreck she'd expected from the town's stories. She got Bess inside, found an empty stall, and removed the saddle with trembling hands. The horse immediately began drinking from a water trough, unconcerned with whose property they'd invaded. "Sorry," Alara whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was apologizing to the horse or the absent owner. "Just for tonight." She approached the house slowly, boots squelching in the mud. Up close, it was bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories, stone foundation, wraparound porch that had weathered decades of frontier storms. Light spilled from the downstairs windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was definitely home. Alara stood on the porch, rain hammering the roof above her, and tried to decide what to say. "I'm sorry for trespassing. The storm trapped me. I'll leave at first light. Simple. Honest." She raised her hand to knock. The door opened before her knuckles touched wood. The man standing in the doorway was not what Alara had expected. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked carved from the same stone as his foundation. But his eyes weren't cruel. They were cautious, yes. Surprised, definitely. But not angry. He looked at her soaked coat, her muddy boots, her face pale from cold and fear, and something shifted in his expression. "Storm catch you?" His voice was quiet, rough from disuse. Alara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Horse in the barn?" Another nod. He stepped aside. "Get in here before you freeze." She hesitated. Every warning she'd ever heard about Harley Crow played through her mind in rapid succession. Dangerous, violent, isolated for a reason. But the alternative was dying of exposure in a storm, or worse, being dragged back to her father's house. Alara stepped inside. The warmth hit her immediately. A fire burned in a stone fireplace that dominated the main room. The house smelled like coffee and wood smoke and something cooking, stew maybe. It was clean, not obsessively so, but organized, lived in without being cluttered, nothing like the lair of a madman. Harley closed the door against the wind, shutting out the storm's roar. In the sudden quiet, Alara could hear her own breathing, fast and shallow. "You hurt?" he asked. "No." Running from something or toward something? The directness of the question caught her off guard. Most people in Red Hollow danced around uncomfortable truths. This man just laid them out plain. "Both," she admitted. He nodded like that made perfect sense. "You can stay until the storm passes. There's a room upstairs, clean. Lock on the door if it makes you feel safer." Alara stared at him. "You don't even know who I am." "Don't need to. Storm like this. Anyone caught outside is in trouble." He moved toward the fireplace, picked up an iron poker, adjusted a log. "You're not the first person to end up here by accident. The town says, I know what the town says." His voice didn't change, but something in his shoulders went tight. "Town says a lot of things, most of them wrong." He disappeared into what looked like a kitchen, returned with a towel and a blanket, handed them to her without getting too close, like he was trying not to spook a wild animal. "There's coffee on the stove, hot water for washing if you need it. Stew should be ready in about 20 minutes if you're hungry." Alara took the towel, her fingers brushing his for just a second. His hands were calloused, scarred across the knuckles. Working hands. "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before she could stop it. Harley looked at her for a long moment. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating his face in stark detail. He looked tired, she realized. Not old, maybe 35, but worn down by something heavier than years. "Because nobody helped me when I needed it," he said quietly. Seemed like a mistake worth correcting. Then he turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving Alara standing by the fire with a towel in her hands and a dozen questions she didn't know how to ask. She dried her face, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and tried to figure out what she'd stumbled into. The stew was good. Simple. Beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, but seasoned right and cooked slow. Alara hadn't realized how hungry she was until the smell hit her. She ate 2 bowls while Harley sat across the table nursing coffee and watching the storm through the window. He didn't ask questions, didn't push for her story, just let the silence sit between them like a third person at the table. It was Alara who finally broke. I ran away from an arranged marriage, she said, staring at her empty bowl. My father decided I should marry Silas Granger. Didn't ask me. Just announced it like I was property being transferred. Harley's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened slightly around his coffee cup. Silas is 52, Alara continued. Twice my age, twice widowed. My father says it's a good match. Says Silas can provide for me, protect me, give me status. She laughed, bitter. Like I'm supposed to be grateful. You tell your father no? 3 times. He didn't listen. She met Harley's eyes. So I left. Where were you headed? East. Next county. I have a cousin in Millbrook who might take me in. She paused. Had a cousin. Don't know if she'll risk her reputation by helping me now. Thunder shook the house. Rain lashed the windows like thrown gravel. Storm flooded the canyon pass, Harley said. Won't clear for at least 3 days, maybe more. You're stuck here until then. Alara's stomach dropped. 3 days. Her father would be searching by now. He'd check every friend, every relative, every place she'd ever mentioned wanting to see. But he wouldn't check here. Nobody came to Thornwell Ranch. I can sleep in the barn, she offered. I don't want to impose. Room's already made up, Harley interrupted. And the barn's got a leak in the north corner. You'll be soaked again by morning. I don't understand why you're being kind to me. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, you know what people say about me in town? That you're dangerous, that you hurt someone years ago and got away with it, that you're... She trailed off, suddenly aware how insulting this sounded. Crazy? Harley finished. Yeah, heard that one too. He set his coffee down. Want to know the truth? Alara nodded. 6 years ago, a man named Vernon Hayes owned most of the water rights in this valley. He was bleeding the smaller ranchers dry, charging triple rates, cutting off supply if anyone complained. People were losing their land, their livelihoods. He stood, moved to the window, watched the rain. I proved he'd forged documents to steal those water rights in the first place. Took the evidence to the county officials. Hayes lost everything. Had to leave Red Hollow. That sounds like you helped people, Alara said, confused. Hayes had friends. Rich friends. Powerful friends. They couldn't attack the evidence, so they attacked me instead. Started spreading stories. Said I'd threatened Hayes, run him out with violence, that I was unstable and dangerous. Harley's jaw tightened. People believed them. Easier to believe I was the problem than face the truth about their precious business partners. So you just left town? Didn't see the point in fighting it. Moved out here, worked the land, stayed away from people who'd rather believe lies than face uncomfortable truths. He turned back to face her. Been 6 years. Nobody's bothered checking if the stories were real. Alara understood then. They were the same, in a way. Both of them running from other people's versions of who they should be. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. I chose this. Chose quiet over fighting every damn day. He picked up their empty bowls, carried them to the kitchen. You made a choice too tonight. Running took guts. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. She found herself smiling despite everything. You always this blunt? Practice being alone. Forget how to do the polite dancing around subjects. He glanced at her. That a problem? No, Alara said honestly. It's actually refreshing. The storm continued its assault on the house. Wind rattled the shutters. Rain drummed a constant rhythm on the roof. But inside, with the fire burning and the coffee warm, Alara felt safer than she had in weeks. Harley showed her to the upstairs room, small but clean, with a real bed and a window that overlooked the dark valley. He brought her a change of clothes, men's but dry, and a pitcher of hot water for washing. Locks on the inside, he said, pointing to the door. I'll be downstairs. If you need anything, just yell. Thank you, Alara said, meaning it, for all of this. He nodded, awkward with the gratitude, and left. Alara locked the door, changed into the dry clothes, and collapsed onto the bed. Her body ached from the ride, from the fear, from the adrenaline finally wearing off. She should have been terrified, alone in a stranger's house, trapped by a storm, her father probably organizing a search party. But instead, she felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in months, nobody was telling her what to do, who to marry, how to behave. The dangerous man the town feared had offered her shelter and asked for nothing in return. Outside, lightning illuminated the valley in brilliant white flashes. Elara watched the storm and wondered if running into Harley Crow's house was really the worst mistake of her life. Or maybe, possibly, it was the first good decision she'd made. She woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. For a moment, Elara forgot where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The storm, the ride, the house. She sat up, disoriented. The rain had stopped. Through the window, she could see morning light breaking over the canyon ridge, turning the wet landscape golden. She dressed quickly in her dried clothes. Harley had apparently collected them from where she'd draped them by the fire, and headed downstairs. He was already outside. She could see him through the kitchen window, walking the fence line, checking for damage. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in isolation, like the land was the only company he needed. Elara poured herself coffee and explored the main room properly for the first time. That's when she noticed the books, shelves of them lining an entire wall. Not dime novels or popular trash, but real books. Philosophy, history, agricultural science, engineering, poetry even, Whitman, Dickinson, Poe. She pulled one down, found notes in the margins, thoughtful observations written in precise handwriting. This wasn't the home of an uneducated brute. This was the home of someone who thought deeply, who questioned, who learned. "You read?" Harley's voice came from behind her. She turned, found him standing in the doorway, rain-soaked again from checking the property. "Yes." "You?" "Every night. Only thing that keeps the quiet from getting too loud." He pulled off his wet coat, hung it by the door. "You're welcome to borrow anything. Not like I have company asking for recommendations." Elara traced her finger along the spine of a volume on water management. "Town makes you sound like an ignorant hermit." "Town doesn't know me." "Why don't you correct them?" "Because I'd have to care what they think first." He moved to the stove, poured fresh coffee. "You plan what you're doing after the road's clear?" Back to direct questions. No easing into difficult topics. "Keep heading east, I suppose. Find work if I can. I'm good with numbers, bookkeeping. Surely someone needs help with accounts." She tried to sound confident and failed. Harley studied her over his coffee cup. "You got money?" "Some. Not much." "Skills beyond bookkeeping?" "I can cook, sew, manage a household. I'm decent with horses." She felt defensive suddenly. "I'm not useless, if that's what you're suggesting." "Wasn't." He set his cup down. "Was thinking you might have a harder time than you're expecting. Single woman, no references, running from family. People will ask questions." "I'll manage." "Probably." He didn't sound convinced. But managing and thriving are different things. Before Elara could respond, they heard it. The distant sound of horses. Multiple riders, moving fast. Harley's expression went cold. "Get upstairs," he said quietly. "Now." "What?" "Now, Elara." The use of her name, she hadn't even told him her name, made her freeze. "How did you—" Gerald Vance's daughter, engaged to Silas Granger, disappeared during the storm. Harley moved to the window, watched the approaching riders. "News travels, even out here, especially when important people are involved." Her father had found her. Terror and fury warred in Elara's chest. She wasn't ready. Hadn't figured out what to say, how to stand firm, how to refuse without crumbling. "I won't go back," she said, voice shaking. "I won't marry him." Harley looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she couldn't quite name. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "Then don't," he said simply. "My father will force me. Not if you don't let him." The riders were closer now. She could hear voices, her father's unmistakable among them. Harley turned back to the window. "Your choice, Elara. You can hide upstairs and hope they leave, or you can stand here and tell your father no yourself. Properly this time. He won't listen. Then make him listen." Harley's voice was quiet, but iron hard. "You ran through a storm to escape that marriage. Don't waste the courage by hiding now." Outside, the horses pulled to a stop. Boots hit the ground. Elara's hands were shaking, her heart hammered against her ribs. Everything in her screamed to run, to hide, to avoid confrontation like she'd been trained to do her entire life. But Harley was right. She'd come this far. Running now would mean running forever. She walked to the door and opened it before her father could knock. Gerald Vance stood on the porch, flanked by 3 ranch hands and looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His face was haggard, clothes rumpled, eyes bloodshot from what must have been a sleepless night of searching. When he saw Alara, relief and fury crossed his face in rapid succession. "Get your things," he said, voice tight with controlled anger. "We're leaving." "No," Alara said. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Gerald's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I said no." Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "I'm not going back. I'm not marrying Silas." "The hell you're not." "Gerald!" Harley appeared in the doorway behind Alara, didn't touch her, but his presence was solid as a wall at her back. "She said no." Gerald's gaze shifted to Harley, and something ugly twisted in his expression. "Stay out of this, Crow. This is family business." "Is it?" Harley's voice remained calm. "Because it looks like a father trying to force his daughter into something she doesn't want." "You don't know a damn thing about—" "I know she rode through a killing storm to get away from it," Harley interrupted. "That tells me everything I need to know." Gerald's face went red. "You've got no right." "Neither do you." Harley's voice stayed level, but something dangerous crept into his tone. "She's 24, adult, can make her own choices." "She's my daughter." "She's her own person." The ranch hands shifted uncomfortably, clearly not wanting to be part of this confrontation. One of them, young, maybe 19, looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Gerald focused back on Alara. "You think you can just run away? Embarrass me? Embarrass Silas? Do you have any idea what this does to our family's reputation?" "I don't care about reputation," Alara said, finding her voice. "I care about not being sold like livestock." "Sold?" "Jesus, girl, I'm trying to secure your future. By marrying me to a man old enough to be my father? A man I don't love, don't even like?" Her voice rose. "How is that securing anything except your business deals?" Gerald flinched. Direct hit. "Silas is a good man, established. He'll provide. I can provide for myself." "Doing what? Running some stranger's books? Living hand to mouth in rented rooms?" Gerald shook his head. "You're being childish, emotional. You'll regret this." "Maybe," Alara admitted, "but it'll be my regret, my choice, my life." Father and daughter stared at each other across the porch, years of unspoken conflict finally breaking surface. "If you do this," Gerald said slowly, "I won't be able to protect you anymore. Won't be able to help you when things go wrong. I know. You'll be alone. I'll be free." Something in Gerald's expression cracked then. Not anger anymore, something closer to genuine hurt. "I'm your father," he said quietly. "I'm trying to do right by you." "I know you think that," Alara said, and she meant it. "But your version of right and mine aren't the same anymore." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of water dripping from the eaves, the last remnants of the storm. Finally, Gerald looked at Harley. "If anything happens to her—" "It won't," Harley said. "You don't know that." "No, but neither do you." Harley met the older man's gaze without flinching. "Difference is, I'm willing to let her find out for herself." Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. He looked at Alara one more time, and she saw him truly seeing her, not as his daughter, his property, his problem to solve, but as a separate person making a choice he couldn't control. He didn't like what he saw. "Fine," he said finally, voice hollow. "But don't come crying to me when reality hits. Don't expect me to clean up your mistakes." Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away without looking back. The ranch hands followed, clearly relieved to escape the tension. Alara stood on the porch, watching them disappear into the distance, and tried to figure out if she'd just won or lost everything. Her hands were still shaking. Harley didn't say anything, just stood beside her, solid and quiet, until the last rider vanished from sight. "You okay?" he asked finally. "I don't know," Alara admitted. "Ask me in a week." He almost smiled. "Fair enough." They went back inside. The coffee had gone cold, but Harley made fresh. They sat at the table in silence, processing what had just happened. "He'll come back," Alara said eventually. "When he's had time to think, he'll try again." "Maybe." Or send Silas or the sheriff. She laughed, shaky. I haven't actually solved anything, just delayed it. Harley considered this. You stood your ground, looked him in the eye, and said no. That's not nothing. It doesn't change my situation. I still have nowhere to go, no real prospects, no... You could stay here. Elara stopped mid-sentence, stared at him. What? Stay. Help run the ranch. Harley spoke carefully, like he was working through the idea as he said it. I need someone who can manage books, handle supply orders, deal with the business side. I'm good with land and animals, numbers and people, not so much. You're offering me a job. Employment, room and board, fair wages. He met her eyes. No conditions. You want to leave after a month? Fine. After a year? Fine. Your choice. Elara felt something shift in her chest. Why would you do this? Because you're right. You can provide for yourself, just need someone willing to give you the chance to prove it. He shrugged. And honestly, this place could use someone who knows which end of a ledger is up. People will talk. People already talk. They'll say I'm your... She couldn't finish the sentence. Let them say whatever they want. We'll know the truth. Harley's expression was serious. But I need you to understand something. This is business. I'm not offering rescue or protection or anything else. Just work. Honest work for honest pay. Can you accept that? Elara thought about her alternatives. Running east with limited funds and no connections, returning to her father and admitting defeat, marrying Silas and spending the rest of her life as someone's decorative property, or staying here, working, building something on her own terms. Yes, she said. I can accept that. Then we have a deal. They shook hands across the table, formal, businesslike. But Elara felt the significance of the moment, the weight of choosing her own path for the first time in her life. I'll work hard, she promised. Pull my weight. You won't regret this. Wasn't worried about that, Harley said. And somehow, she believed him. Outside, the sun continued burning off the last of the storm clouds. The valley spread out below the ranch, vast and open and full of possibility. Elara Vance had run away from an arranged marriage and stumbled into the home of Red Hollow's most feared man. She'd found shelter from the storm. Now she'd found something else entirely. A chance. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the future felt like something she might actually want to face. The first week was harder than Elara expected. Not the work itself. She'd grown up on a ranch, knew how to muck stalls and mend fences and cook for a crew. It was the silence that got to her. Harley wasn't much for conversation. He'd nod good morning, discuss what needed doing that day, then disappear into his work until dinner. Sometimes he'd read in the evenings, lamplight catching his face while Elara worked through ledgers at the kitchen table. Other times he'd just sit on the porch, watching the darkness like he was waiting for something that never came. She tried to fill the quiet with activity, organized the pantry, scrubbed floors that didn't really need scrubbing, cataloged the chaos that passed for his record-keeping system. You know you've been paying double for feed the last 3 months, she said one evening, holding up receipts. McAllister's been charging you premium rates for standard grain. Harley looked up from his book. Has he? Either he thinks you're stupid or he thinks you won't check. Probably both. He set the book aside. Can you fix it? Already wrote him a letter. Polite? Professional. With copies of his competitors' pricing attached. She allowed herself a small smile. He'll adjust or lose your business. Good. That was it. Just good. But Elara caught something in his expression that might have been approval. The second week, she started finding problems faster than she could solve them. The ranch's finances were a disaster, not from lack of money, but from complete disorganization. Harley made decent profit on his cattle, but he reinvested without planning, bought equipment without shopping around, paid bills late because he forgot they existed. How have you survived this long? She asked, genuinely baffled, surrounded by 6 months of unsorted paperwork. Stubbornness, mostly. He was fixing a saddle by the fire, leather needle moving with practiced precision, and avoiding people who might take advantage. By hiding out here. By being selective. Elara held up a bill marked Final Notice. You're about to lose your contract with the railroad depot. Didn't know I had a contract with the railroad depot. Well, you did, 3 years ago, for priority cattle transport. She scanned the letter. Looks like they've been trying to reach you for renewal. Sent 4 letters. You answered 0. Harley's hands paused on the saddle. That contract was actually useful. Then maybe answer your mail occasionally. Don't like mail. People use it to send problems. Or opportunities. Contracts. Payment notices. She waved the stack of envelopes. Basic communication with the world you claim to be avoiding. He went back to his stitching, but she caught the corner of his mouth twitching. Not quite a smile. Closed, though. Fix what you can, he said. I'll try to be less of a hermit about paperwork. That's all I ask. The routine settled into something almost comfortable. Harley handled the physical ranch work, early mornings checking cattle, repairing endless fence line, managing the small crew of seasonal hands he hired during busy periods. Alara managed everything else: accounts, supply orders, correspondence, meal planning. They worked in separate spheres that overlapped at breakfast and dinner, where they discussed the day in short, efficient sentences. It wasn't friendship exactly, more like a functional partnership between two people who understood the value of not pushing too hard. But Alara noticed things. The way Harley always made coffee before she woke up, even though he was clearly not a morning person. How he'd leave books on the table that he thought she might like, never mentioning them directly. The careful distance he maintained, never crowding her space, never entering a room without warning, always making sure she felt safe even when they were alone. He was thoughtful in ways most men weren't. It made her curious. One evening, 3 weeks into her stay, she found him on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was doing that thing it did sometimes in October, turning the clouds into ribbons of orange and purple and red that looked too vivid to be real. You ever get lonely out here? She asked, leaning against the railing. Harley was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, used to. First year was hard, felt like I'd been erased from the world. What changed? Stopped expecting it to feel different. He glanced at her. Loneliness doesn't go away just because you get used to it. You just stop fighting it so hard. Alara considered this. That's depressing. That's honest. You could go back to town, make peace with people, start over. Could. He didn't sound convinced. But then I'd have to care what they think again. Easier not to. Is it, though? Easier? Harley looked at her properly then, something shifting behind his eyes. You planning to psychoanalyze me, or can I enjoy this sunset in peace? Just trying to understand you. Why? Good question. Why did she care about understanding a man she barely knew? Someone who'd given her work and shelter but kept himself locked away behind careful distance? Because you're the first person in a long time who's treated me like I have a brain, she said finally. Seems worth understanding why. He turned back to the sunset, but his posture had changed, less guarded. Your father treated you like property, he said quietly. Town treated me like a cautionary tale. Maybe we both just needed someone who could see past the convenient labels. Is that what we are? Two people refusing to be what others decided? Something like that. They stood in silence, watching the sky burn itself out. Alara felt something shift between them. Not romance, not yet, but the first tentative thread of real connection. The kind that happened when two people stopped performing and started being honest. Thank you, she said eventually, for the job, for not asking too many questions, for don't. Harley's voice was gentle but firm. You're working hard, pulling your weight. No thanks needed for fair exchange. But it wasn't just fair exchange, and they both knew it. He could have hired anyone, could have turned her away that first night. Instead, he'd given her exactly what she needed most, a chance to prove herself on her own terms. The sunset faded. The air turned cold. They went inside for dinner, and Alara tried to ignore the warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. The fourth week brought trouble in the form of Carson Blake. He arrived mid-morning while Harley was out checking the north pasture. Alara heard the horse first, then the knock, aggressive, impatient. She opened the door to find a man in his 40s, well-dressed in expensive ranch wear, with the kind of face that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. Help you? She asked, staying in the doorway. Carson looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. You the new housekeeper? I'm the bookkeeper. What do you need? Need to talk to Crow about his water access. Alara knew about the water situation. The creek that ran through Thornwell Ranch fed into several downstream properties. Harley had legal rights to a percentage, documented and filed with the county. Simple enough. Except Carson Blake wanted to build a new irrigation system that would require more water than his share allowed. "Mr. Crow isn't here," Elara said. "You can leave a message or come back later. I'll wait." "Could be hours." "I've got time." Carson pushed past her into the house without invitation, looking around like he owned the place. "Coffee on?" Elara's jaw tightened. "I'll check." She poured him coffee she hoped would scald his tongue and waited while Carson settled into Harley's chair by the fire like he belonged there. "So you're Vance's daughter," Carson said casually. "Heard you ran off. Caused quite the scandal." "News travels. Always does. Especially when it involves important families." He sipped the coffee, made a face. "Your daddy's still looking for you? That's none of your business." "Fair enough, just making conversation." But his eyes said otherwise. "Must be rough, though, going from a nice ranch to playing servant for a man like Crow." Elara's hands curled into fists. "I'm employed, not a servant, and Mr. Crow is a fair employer." "Sure he is." Carson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That why you're hiding out here? Because he's so fair?" "I'm not hiding." "Right. Just happened to end up working for the one man in 3 counties who never comes to town. Convenient." Before Elara could respond, they heard hoofbeats. Harley rode up fast, clearly having spotted the unfamiliar horse. He dismounted in one smooth motion and came through the door with an expression that could freeze water. "Blake?" His voice was flat. "What do you want?" Carson stood, all false friendliness. "Harley, good to see you. I was just having a nice chat with your bookkeeper here. She's not paid to chat with you. State your business or leave." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Carson's smile went tight. "Still the same charming bastard? Fine, I'll be direct. I'm expanding my irrigation system. Need more water from the creek. Willing to pay fair price for an adjustment to the access agreement." "No." "You haven't even heard my offer." "Don't need to. Answer's no." Harley moved between Carson and Elara, a deliberate positioning that wasn't lost on either of them. "The water rights are filed and legal. You get your share, I get mine. Done." "Come on, Crow. Be reasonable. I'm talking about a small adjustment that would cut my cattle herd's water supply by 1/3. Harley's voice stayed level, but gained an edge. "You think I'm stupid? I think you're being stubborn. I'm offering good money. Money doesn't matter if my cattle die of thirst." Carson's expression hardened. "You know, this is exactly why people in town call you difficult. Can't work with others, can't compromise. Just hide out here playing king of your little kingdom. If that's what they're saying, then they're consistent." Harley opened the door. "We're done here." "Listen, we're done, Blake." For a moment, Carson looked like he might push it. His hand drifted toward his belt. Not to a weapon, but the gesture was threatening enough. Harley didn't move, didn't tense, just stood there with absolute stillness that somehow felt more dangerous than any aggressive posture. Carson backed down. "Fine, but you're making a mistake. People remember when you won't cooperate." He headed for the door, paused next to Elara. "And your daddy's still asking around about you. Might want to send word you're all right, unless you're not." Then he was gone, mounting his horse and riding off with enough speed to kick up dust. Harley closed the door, stood there for a moment with his hand on the knob. "You okay?" he asked without turning around. "Yes. He was rude, but I handled it." "Shouldn't have had to. He had no business coming in here, talking to you like that." Harley finally looked at her, anger simmering behind carefully controlled features. "What did he say before I got here?" Elara recounted the conversation, watched Harley's jaw tighten with every detail. "He was testing you," Harley said finally, "seeing if you'd break. Give him information he could use." "Use for what?" "Leverage. Blake's been trying to buy out smaller ranchers for years. Expands his property, consolidates water rights, increases his power in the county." Harley moved to the window, watched Carson disappear into the distance. "He thinks everyone has a price. Everyone can be pressured. And when he finds someone who can't, he gets creative." The word hung in the air like a threat. Elara thought about Carson's parting comment, her father still asking around, the implication that she might not be safe here. "Do you think he'll cause trouble?" she asked. "Probably. Blake doesn't like being told no." Harley turned back to her. "But that's not your problem to solve. You just do your job. I'll handle Blake if he comes back. What if he brings the sheriff, claims I'm being held here against my will or something? Sheriff's known me 15 years, knows I don't kidnap women. Harley's expression softened slightly. Besides, you've got free will. Anyone asks, you tell them the truth. You're employed, paid, free to leave any time. But I'm not leaving. No? No. Alara met his eyes. I made a commitment. I keep my commitments. Something passed between them then. Understanding. Maybe respect. Harley nodded once, that tiny gesture that meant more than a paragraph of words. Good, because those account books aren't going to fix themselves. He went back outside to finish his work, leaving Alara alone with her thoughts and the lingering tension from Carson's visit. That night she had trouble sleeping, kept replaying the conversation, the veiled threats, the way Carson had looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person. It reminded her too much of the way her father's business associates had looked at her, as a commodity, a trading piece, something to be used for advantage. She heard movement downstairs around midnight, found Harley at the kitchen table, making notes by lamplight. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. He looked up, unsurprised to see her. Thinking about Blake. His timing suspicious. How so? He's been after my water rights for 2 years. Always found an excuse not to push too hard. Harley tapped his pencil against the table. Now, suddenly, he shows up the same month you start working here, makes pointed comments about your father. Alara's stomach dropped. You think they're connected? Think it's possible. Blake runs in the same circles as Silas Granger. Wouldn't surprise me if your father reached out, asked around about where you ended up. So what? Blake shows up to intimidate me? Report back to my father? Or to create leverage, make you uncomfortable enough to leave? Harley's eyes were sharp despite the late hour. If you disappear again, your father looks better. Can claim you're unstable, can't hold employment, need family intervention. The strategy was so calculated it made Alara's skin crawl. That's twisted. That's politics, ranch politics specifically. Harley set his pencil down. Question is, what do you want to do about it? What can I do? Stay. Keep working. Prove you're stable and employed and exactly where you want to be. He paused. Or leave if it gets too complicated. Go somewhere your father's reputation doesn't reach. Alara thought about it. Really thought about it. She could run again. Find another town, another job, another fresh start. Keep running every time someone from her old life showed up with questions or threats or convenient coincidences. Or she could stop running and make them deal with the fact that she wasn't coming back. I'm staying, she said firmly. Let Blake report whatever he wants. Let my father hear I'm working for you. I don't care anymore. You sure? Because once word spreads that Gerald Vance's daughter is keeping house for Harley Crow, the stories people tell will get ugly. They're already ugly. At least this way I'm choosing what I'm fighting for. Harley studied her face for a long moment. Then he stood, moved to the stove, started heating water for tea without asking if she wanted any. Your father came by yesterday, he said quietly, while you were in town buying supplies. Alara froze. What? He didn't stay long, just wanted to make sure you were all right, that I wasn't... Harley's jaw tightened. Taking advantage. What did you tell him? The truth. That you're employed, working hard, free to leave whenever you want. He poured hot water over tea leaves, the familiar ritual steadying him. He didn't like it. Said I was enabling your rebellion, making things worse. What did you say? That his opinion on the matter wasn't required or relevant. Harley handed her a cup. He left after that. But he's not done. Men like Gerald Vance don't give up easy. They just change tactics. Alara wrapped her hands around the warm cup, let the heat ground her. Thank you for not telling me right away, for letting me have one more day without that hanging over my head. Figured you'd had enough to deal with. He returned to his chair, picked up his notes. But you should know, your father's not the only one watching this situation. Carson Blake, Silas Granger, probably half the town by now. They're waiting to see if you break. Then I won't break. That's simple. That's simple. Harley almost smiled. You're stubborn. Look who's talking. Asa. They drank their tea in comfortable silence, two stubborn people refusing to bend to pressure that would have crushed most others. Outside, the night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Alara thought about her father visiting, about Carson Blake's veiled threats, about all the ways powerful men tried to control situations they didn't like. And she thought about how none of it mattered as long as she kept choosing herself. "Harley?" she said eventually. "Yeah?" "When you stood up to Vernon Hayes, when you knew it would cost you everything, was it worth it?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "At the time, no. Felt like I'd destroyed my life for nothing, lost my reputation, my place in town, any chance at a normal future. And now I know the truth. I didn't destroy my life. I just stopped living the one other people wanted for me." He met her eyes across the table. "Started building something real instead. Even though you're alone?" "I was alone in town too. Just had more people around to make the loneliness feel worse." His expression softened. "But lately, the last month or so, this place feels less empty." Alara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Because of the bookkeeping? Because of the company?" The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Not a declaration, not a promise, just acknowledgement that something was shifting, changing, becoming more than a simple business arrangement. Alara knew she should be careful, should maintain professional distance, should remember that she was rebuilding her life, not looking for romance with the first man who'd shown her basic human decency. But she also knew that whatever was developing between her and Harley Crow felt different from anything she'd experienced before. It wasn't the desperate passion poets wrote about. It was quieter, steadier, built on respect and shared understanding rather than expectation and control. It felt real. "I should get some sleep," she said, standing. "Early start tomorrow." "Alara," she turned back. "Whatever happens, with your father, with Blake, with anyone else who decides to make this complicated, you don't face it alone. We're in this together now. We're in this together." 4 words that shouldn't have meant as much as they did. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with everything she had. She went upstairs, climbed into bed, and for the first time since arriving at Thornwell Ranch, she felt something she hadn't expected to find. Home. The feeling terrified and comforted her in equal measure. But as she drifted toward sleep, listening to Harley moving around downstairs, she decided that maybe terrifying and comforting together was what real safety actually felt like. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of someone willing to stand beside you when it came. The confrontation came on a Thursday night in early November, when the temperature had dropped low enough to frost the windows and make breath visible in the lamplight. Alara was finishing the monthly accounts when she heard horses. Multiple riders again, but this time moving slower, more deliberate. She set down her pen and moved to the window, already knowing who it would be. Her father. And he hadn't come alone. Gerald Vance sat tall in his saddle, flanked by 4 ranch hands, and, predictably, Silas Granger. Even from a distance, Alara could see the tension in her father's shoulders, the set of his jaw that meant he'd come prepared for a fight. Harley appeared from the barn, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He'd been fixing the plow blade, working late despite the cold. He stopped when he saw the riders, and even from inside the house, Alara could see his entire posture change, not aggressive, but ready. She grabbed her coat and went outside before anyone could knock. The cold hit her like a slap, but she kept her spine straight as she walked down the porch steps and stood beside Harley. United front. The way they'd discussed if this moment ever came. Gerald's eyes moved between them, taking in their positioning, and something ugly crossed his face. "Alara," he said, voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk." "Then talk," she replied. "Alone." "No." Gerald's jaw tightened. "This is family business. Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Harley. He's my employer." She emphasized the last word deliberately. "And this is his property you're on." Silas shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable. He was exactly as Alara remembered, weathered face, gray at the temples, eyes that never quite met hers directly. He wore his good coat, probably at Gerald's insistence, like formality would somehow fix this situation. "Miss Vance," Silas said quietly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't," Alara cut him off. "I don't want to marry you. I never did. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a clear statement." "You haven't given us a chance to explain." "Explain what?" How you and my father decided my future without consulting me? How I'm supposed to be grateful for being sold like cattle? Her voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. What exactly needs explaining? Gerald dismounted, moved closer. The ranch hands stayed on their horses, clearly not wanting to be part of this. One of them, young Tommy Reeves, who'd worked for Gerald since he was 16, looked actively miserable. I've been patient, Gerald said, giving you time to come to your senses. But this has gone on long enough. You're coming home. I am home. You're living in sin with a man the entire county knows is dangerous. I'm employed, Alara interrupted. Working, earning wages, living in a separate room with a lock on the door. There's no sin here except in your imagination. People are talking. People always talk. Let them. Gerald's face flushed red. You think you can just throw away everything? Your reputation? Your family? Your future? I'm not throwing anything away. I'm building something for myself. By keeping house for a hermit? By hiding out here pretending you're independent? Gerald gestured at the ranch dismissively. This isn't independence, Alara. This is running away. No, Harley said quietly, speaking for the first time. Running away is what she did the night of the storm. This is what staying looks like. Gerald turned on him, fury barely contained. You stay out of this, Crow. You've done enough damage. I haven't done anything except give your daughter honest work and fair pay. Harley's voice remained level. Which is apparently more than you were willing to offer. You arrogant son of a Gerald. Silas dismounted, put a hand on the older man's shoulder. Let's stay civil. Civil? Gerald shook him off. He's corrupted my daughter, turned her against her own family. Nobody corrupted me, Alara said sharply. I made my own choice. Me, not Harley, not anyone else. You're 24 years old. Exactly, an adult, legally free to make my own decisions. Poor decisions, reckless decisions. Gerald's voice cracked slightly. You think I don't know what this looks like? My daughter living alone with a man, working like common labor, throwing away every opportunity I've tried to give her? Opportunities? Is that what you call forcing me into marriage with a man I don't love? Love? Gerald spat the word like it tasted bad. Love doesn't pay bills, Alara, doesn't put food on the table or keep a roof over your head. Silas can provide all of that. I can provide it for myself. For how long? Until Crow here gets bored, until the town pressure gets too strong, until you realize this fantasy of independence doesn't work in the real world. Then I'll figure it out, Alara said. But it'll be my problem to solve, not yours. The words hit Gerald like a physical blow. He took a step back, looking at his daughter like she was a stranger. When did you become so selfish? He asked quietly. The question stung more than shouting would have. Alara felt it land in her chest, sharp and aimed. When you stopped seeing me as a person, she said, and started seeing me as property to negotiate. Silence fell over the group. Even the horses seemed to sense the tension, shifting restlessly. Silas cleared his throat. Perhaps we could all take a moment. No. Gerald's voice was flat, final. No more moments, no more patience. Alara, you have two choices. Come home tonight, marry Silas as planned, and we put this whole mess behind us. Or stay here and be cut off completely. No money, no support, no family. Gerald, that's too harsh, Silas started. It's the truth. I won't enable this rebellion any longer. Gerald looked at Alara. Choose. Alara felt Harley tense beside her, but he didn't interfere. This was her fight, her choice, exactly like he'd promised. She thought about what she was being asked to give up, her father's protection, the Vance name, any inheritance that might have come her way, the safety net of family, however flawed. Then she thought about what she'd gained by going back. A marriage to a man she didn't love, a life of silent obedience, years of being what other people decided she should be instead of discovering who she actually was. The math wasn't even close. Then I choose to stay, she said clearly, and you can tell everyone in Red Hollow that Alara Vance chose honest work and self-respect over being traded like livestock. Gerald's face went white, then red, then white again. You'll regret this. Maybe, but it'll be my regret. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. That's my right. Father and daughter stared at each other across the cold darkness. 24 years of history between them, birthday parties and Christmas mornings, and her mother's funeral where Gerald had held Alara's hand and promised everything would be all right. All of it came down to this moment, this choice, this final severing of the life she'd been born into. "If you walk away from this family," Gerald said slowly, "don't come crawling back when reality hits. Don't expect me to clean up your mess. I won't. This is final, Alara. You understand that? Final." "I understand." Gerald looked at her for one more long moment, and Alara saw something break in his expression. Not anger anymore. Something sadder. Grief, maybe, for the daughter he thought he'd raised, the future he'd planned that was disintegrating in front of him. "Then I have no daughter," he said quietly. The words should have destroyed her, should have sent her running back, apologizing, begging forgiveness. That's what Gerald expected, what he'd counted on. But Alara had spent the last 2 months learning what it felt like to make her own decisions and live with the consequences. She'd discovered she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had given her credit for. "Then I have no father," she replied, voice steady despite the pain. "We're even." Gerald mounted his horse in one swift motion, movements jerky with barely contained emotion. "Let's go," he said to his men. Silas hesitated. "Miss Vance, I want you to know, I never wanted this to end badly. Your father thought, we both thought." "I know what you thought," Alara said, not unkindly, "but what I think matters too." Silas nodded, looking genuinely regretful, and mounted his own horse. The riders turned to leave, but Gerald paused at the property line, looked back one final time. "You're wrong about him," he said, gesturing at Harley. "Everyone is. He's not dangerous because he's violent. He's dangerous because he makes people believe they can survive alone. And you can't. Nobody can." Then he rode away, the others following, until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the darkness, and Alara was left standing in the cold with Harley beside her, and the weight of what she'd just done settling into her bones. She waited until they were completely gone before her knees buckled. Harley caught her before she hit the ground, strong arms wrapping around her waist, holding her steady. She didn't cry, couldn't seem to find tears for something that felt too big and final for simple sadness. She just stood there, shaking, while Harley held her and didn't say any of the useless, comforting things people usually said. He just held her. And somehow, that was enough. "Come on," he said eventually, voice gentle. "Let's get you inside before you freeze." He guided her back to the house, settled her by the fire, wrapped her in blankets even though the shaking had nothing to do with temperature. Then he made coffee, strong and hot, and laced with something from a bottle he kept in the kitchen cupboard. "Drink," he ordered. Alara drank. The whiskey burned going down, but it helped, grounded her, reminded her she was still present, still here, still capable of feeling physical sensation even when her emotional self felt numb. "You did the right thing," Harley said, sitting across from her. "Did I?" "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because you chose yourself. That's always right, even when it hurts like hell." Alara stared into the fire, watching flames dance and consume wood that had no choice in the matter. "He really cut me off. No family, no safety net, no going back." "Yes. I should be terrified. Probably. But I'm not. Is that wrong?" Harley considered this. "You feel what you feel. No right or wrong to it." "I feel..." She struggled to find words for the complex tangle in her chest. "Free. And guilty about feeling free. And angry that I feel guilty. And relieved that it's finally over. And scared about what comes next, all at the same time." "Sounds about right for a life-changing decision. Have you ever..." She stopped, started again. "When you left town, cut yourself off from everyone, did you feel like this?" "Worse, probably. Because I didn't have anyone standing beside me when I made the choice." Harley met her eyes. "You're not alone, Alara. Whatever happens next, you're not facing it alone." The words hit deeper than they should have. Alara felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd been maintaining crack and start to crumble. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really? Not the surface reason. The real one." Harley was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the darkness. "Because 6 years ago, I stood exactly where you're standing now, he said finally. Made the same kind of choice, walked away from everything familiar because staying meant becoming someone I couldn't live with. And it was the loneliest thing I've ever done. But you survived. Surviving and living are different things. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I survived. Built this place. Made it work. But I forgot what it felt like to have someone understand why the choice mattered. Forgot what connection feels like when it's built on honesty instead of expectation. And now? Now I remember. His voice was rough, honest. You remind me. Alara's heart did something complicated. She'd been so careful, so determined to keep this professional, to not confuse gratitude with attraction or partnership with romance. But sitting here, wrapped in blankets by the fire, with Harley looking at her like she mattered, not as property or obligation, but as a person who'd made a brave and difficult choice, she felt something crack open inside her, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Harley. Don't. He held up a hand. Don't say anything you're not ready to say. Tonight was hard enough. You need time to process, to figure out what you want without me confusing things. What if you're not confusing things? Then that'll still be true tomorrow, or next week, or next month. He stood, gathered the coffee cups. Right now you need to rest. Let tonight settle. Everything else can wait. He was right, and Alara knew it. Her emotions were too raw, too tangled to trust any declaration she might make in this moment. She needed distance, perspective, time to separate what she felt from what she'd just been through. But she also knew something had fundamentally shifted between them tonight. They'd crossed some invisible line from employer-employee to something deeper, something neither of them had names for yet, but both recognized. Thank you, she said as Harley headed toward the kitchen, for standing beside me, for not trying to fix it or tell me what to do, for just being there. He paused in the doorway. You stood on your own, Alara. I was just close enough to catch you if you fell. Is that what we're doing? Catching each other? Seems like it. Good, she said, because I'm pretty sure I'd have fallen a lot further without you. Harley smiled then, a real smile, small but genuine. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. He was right about that too. News of the confrontation spread through Red Hollow faster than fire through dry grass. By Sunday, everyone knew that Gerald Vance had disowned his daughter, that she was still living at Thornwell Ranch, that respectable folks were scandalized and gossips were having a field day. Alara heard about it when she went to town for supplies. The general store went quiet when she walked in. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Women she'd known her whole life suddenly found their shopping very interesting. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the post office, actually crossed to the other side of the street when she saw Alara coming. It would have been funny if it didn't hurt. Alara kept her head high, purchased what she needed, and ignored the whispers that followed her like shadows. Let them talk, let them judge. She'd made her choice and she'd stand by it. But walking back to where she'd left the wagon, she felt the weight of it, the isolation, the way an entire community could turn on you for refusing to follow their rules about how women should behave. She was loading supplies when someone spoke behind her. They're idiots, you know. Alara turned to find a woman about her age, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing work clothes and an expression of frank assessment. Excuse me? The town. Bunch of idiots who'd rather gossip than mind their own business. The woman extended a hand. Clara Morrison. My husband and I have a small ranch about 10 miles south of Crow's place. Alara shook her hand, surprised. You know Harley? Not well, but better than most folks who've never bothered trying. Clara leaned against the wagon. Heard what happened with your father. Takes guts to stand up like that. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Clara smiled. Look, I won't pretend we're about to be best friends or anything, but if you need help, supplies, advice, someone to talk to who isn't going to lecture you about proper behavior, our door's open. Why? Alara asked bluntly. You don't know me. No, but I know what it's like to make choices that disappoint people. Clara glanced around the street at the watching eyes and judging faces. Besides, any woman who tells Gerald Vance to go to hell can't be all bad. Despite everything, Alara laughed. I didn't actually say that. Close enough. Clara pushed off the wagon. Anyway, offer stands. You need anything, you know where to find us. She walked away before Alara could respond, leaving behind the first genuine kindness anyone in town had shown her in weeks. It was a small thing, one person's decency in a sea of judgment, but it mattered more than Clara probably knew. Alara finished loading the wagon and headed home, and realized with a start that she'd thought of Thornwell Ranch as home without even questioning it. Not her father's house, not some temporary stopping point. Home. When had that happened? Harley was in the barn when she got back, checking on a mare that was due to foal any day. He helped her unload without commenting on how long she'd been gone or asking how it went in town. He'd know. News traveled both ways. "Met someone today," Alara said, carrying a sack of flour to the pantry. "Clara Morrison said she lives south of here. The Morrisons are good people, keep to themselves mostly. She was kind. First person in town who didn't look at me like I'd grown a second head." Harley set down a bag of oats. "That means something to you? What the town thinks?" "It shouldn't, but yes, a little." Alara leaned against the counter. "I knew it would be bad, but actually experiencing it, the silence, the stares, the way people I've known my whole life suddenly can't look at me, it's harder than I expected. It'll get worse before it gets better." Encouraging. "Honest?" He moved closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she could feel his presence like warmth from a fire. People don't like being proved wrong about their assumptions. Makes them defensive. They'll need time to accept that you're not coming back, that their version of how things should be doesn't control you anymore. How long did it take for them to accept you? "Still waiting," Alara smiled sadly. "So we're both outcasts now." "Looks like." "Think we'll survive it?" Harley's expression softened. "I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Think you'll do more than survive." "What about thrive? Isn't that what you said? Managing and thriving are different?" "Yes." "So which one am I doing?" He looked at her for a long moment, dark eyes serious. "Ask me in 6 months. Right now you're still figuring things out, but my money's on thriving." "Why?" "Because you're still standing, still working, still choosing yourself even when it costs." He reached out, almost touched her face, then pulled back. "That's not just survival, Alara. That's courage." The space between them felt charged suddenly, full of things neither was ready to say. Alara thought about closing the distance, about testing whether what she felt was real or just gratitude wrapped in loneliness. But Harley stepped back first, giving her space she hadn't asked for but probably needed. "Dinner in an hour?" he said. "I'll cook." "You always cook. You always fix everything that breaks. Seems like a fair trade." He almost smiled. Fair enough. They moved around each other in the kitchen later, a practice dance they'd developed over weeks of shared space. Harley washed vegetables while Alara prepared meat. She handed him plates. He set the table. Small domestic rhythms that felt comfortable despite, or maybe because of, how new they still were. Over dinner, they talked about the ranch, the mare that would foal soon, the fence line that needed reinforcing before winter hit hard, the accounts that were finally organized enough to see actual profit margins. Normal things. Safe things. But underneath it all, Alara felt the current of change running swift and deep. They'd crossed something tonight in the barn. Not a line exactly, but an acknowledgement that what existed between them was more than professional courtesy or forced proximity. It was real. And it was growing. And for the first time in her life, Alara wasn't sure what to do about something she wanted, but didn't know how to ask for. So she did what she'd been doing since arriving at Thornwell Ranch. She worked. She focused. She took it one day at a time and trusted that the answers would come when she was ready to hear them. Outside, the November wind picked up, rattling windows and promising the hard winter to come. Inside, by the fire, Alara Vance sat with her ledgers and coffee in the quiet company of a man who'd given her exactly what she needed most. Space to become whoever she was meant to be. The town could whisper. Her father could rage. The future could be uncertain. But right here, right now, she was exactly where she chose to be. And that would have to be enough. Winter came hard that year, dropping snow and thick blankets that turned the valley into something from a painted postcard. Beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Alara learned what real ranch work meant when the temperature stayed below freezing for days at a time. Breaking ice on water troughs before dawn. hauling feed through snowdrifts that came up to her knees, checking cattle in conditions so cold her fingers went numb inside 2 layers of gloves. Harley worked beside her without complaint, teaching her the rhythm of winter survival, how to read the sky for incoming storms, which sheltered valleys the cattle would drift toward, how to keep yourself moving when everything in your body screamed to curl up somewhere warm and wait for spring. "You're tougher than you look," he said one morning after they'd spent 3 hours digging out a heifer trapped in a collapsed snowbank. Alara wiped snow from her face, too exhausted to be gracious. "I don't feel tough. I feel half dead." "Same thing sometimes." They trudged back to the house, the rescued heifer safe in the barn behind them. Alara's entire body ached. Her back screamed. Her hands were raw despite the gloves. She'd never been this physically exhausted in her life. And somehow, she'd never felt more alive. Inside, they peeled off frozen layers and stood by the fire until sensation returned to their extremities. Harley made coffee while Alara started on breakfast, both of them moving slow like old people, bodies protesting every motion. "This what you expected?" Harley asked, handing her a cup. "When you took the job?" "Expected spreadsheets and supply orders. Maybe some light bookkeeping." She laughed, tired. "Not manual labor in a blizzard. You can stick to the books if you want. Don't have to help with the physical work." "Yes, I do." "Why?" "Because it's my ranch too now." The words came out before she'd thought them through. "I mean, not legally, obviously, but it feels like mine, like I'm building something here, not just working for wages." Harley went very still. "That how you see it? Is that wrong?" "No, just..." He set his coffee down, looked at her properly. "Just unexpected. Good unexpected." Something passed between them then, warm despite the frozen world outside. Alara felt it settle in her chest, that sense of belonging she'd been dancing around for weeks. "Harley, can I ask you something?" "Always." "When I leave, eventually, whenever that is, what happens to this place?" His expression shuddered. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you'll go back to doing everything yourself. The books will fall apart again. The organization will disappear. You'll be alone again." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "That doesn't bother you?" "Why would I assume you're leaving?" "Because that was the deal. I could leave whenever I wanted, no conditions." "That offer still stands." "I know, but that's not what I'm asking." Alara struggled to articulate the thought. "I'm asking if you want me to stay. Not because I'm useful or because the work needs doing, but because you want the company." Harley's jaw tightened. He turned toward the window, looking out at the white landscape like it held answers he couldn't find inside. "You're asking if this is more than business?" he said finally. "Yes." "For me or for you?" "Both." The silence stretched. Alara waited, heart hammering, suddenly terrified she'd pushed too hard too fast. "For me, it stopped being just business about 3 weeks in," Harley said quietly, still not looking at her. "When you reorganized the entire filing system and labeled everything in that precise handwriting. When you started leaving coffee ready in the morning before I woke up. When you argued with me about the fence repair and turned out to be completely right about the weak posts." He turned back to face her. "When you stood up to your father and chose yourself even though it cost everything. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That I didn't just want you to stay. I needed you to stay because this place, my life, it's better with you in it." His voice was rough with honesty. "And I know that's not fair. No, I'm your employer and you might feel obligated or grateful or confused about what you're feeling, but you asked for the truth and that's it." Alara's throat went tight. "What if I'm not confused?" "Then tell me what you are." "Terrified," she admitted. "Because everything in my life before this taught me not to trust men who say they need me. That need is just another word for control." "It is sometimes. But not with you." "No, not with me." Harley moved closer, stopped just outside of touching distance. "I need you the way I need air, the way I need the sun to rise, not because I can't survive without it, but because survival without it isn't living, it's just existing." That's the most words I've ever heard you say at once. He almost smiled. "Been saving them up?" "For what?" "For when you were ready to hear them." Alara set down her coffee, closed the distance between them, and did what she'd been wanting to do for weeks. She reached up and touched his face, felt the rough stubble under her palm, the warmth of his skin, the way he went absolutely still, like he was afraid to breathe wrong and break the moment. "I'm ready," she said. Harley's hand came up to cover hers. "You sure? Because once we cross this line, I'm sure. Your father will hear about it. The town will have a field day. People will say terrible things. Let them." Alara smiled. "I stopped caring what they think the night I chose to stay here." Alara. She kissed him before he could talk himself out of it, before either of them could overthink or second guess or find another reason why this was complicated. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative. Then Harley's other hand came up to cup her face, and everything shifted, deepened, became something more than gentle. It became real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harley rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to have to figure this out," he said. "Figure what out?" "How to be partners. Both kinds." "I think we've been figuring it out for months already." "Yeah." He pulled back enough to look at her properly. "Yeah, I guess we have." They stood there in the kitchen, snow falling outside, fire crackling inside, and Alara felt something settle into place. Something she hadn't known she was missing until she found it. Not rescue, not protection, not someone to solve her problems or make decisions for her. Just partnership, honest and equal and built on respect instead of obligation. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we work, same as always." Harley's thumb traced her cheekbone. "Just with fewer questions about what this is." "And what is this? Something worth keeping." It wasn't poetry, wasn't a grand declaration, but it was Harley, honest and direct, and that made it perfect. "Okay," Alara said. "Let's keep it then." They went back to work. Fed the animals, checked the fences. Did all the normal things they'd been doing for months. But everything felt different now. Lighter, somehow. Like they'd been carrying weight neither had acknowledged until they set it down together. That night, Harley cooked dinner for the first time since Alara had started working for him. It was terrible, burnt edges, under-seasoned, timing completely off, but Alara ate every bite and didn't complain once. "This is awful," Harley said, staring at his plate. "It's the worst thing I've ever eaten." "Why are you still eating it?" "Because you made it." Alara took another bite, forced herself to swallow, and the effort matters more than the result. That's a nice way of saying I should never cook again. That too. They both laughed, and it felt easy in a way nothing had felt easy for Alara in longer than she could remember. No performance. No trying to be what someone else wanted, just two people being honestly, comfortably themselves. After dinner, they sat by the fire like they had dozens of times before. But this time, when Alara leaned against Harley's shoulder, he put his arm around her, and neither of them pretended it was just for warmth. "Tell me something," Alara said eventually. "Something true about you that nobody else knows." Harley was quiet for a moment. "I'm scared most of the time." "Of what?" "That I'll wake up one day and all of this, will turn out to be temporary. That you'll realize you can do better and leave. That I'll end up alone again, and it'll be worse this time because I'll know exactly what I'm missing." The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and raw. "I'm not going anywhere," Alara said. "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise that if I ever do leave, it won't be because I found something better. It'll be because something broke that we couldn't fix." "And if nothing breaks?" "Then I guess you're stuck with me." Harley's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I can live with that." They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued falling, adding to the drifts that would make morning work even harder. But inside, wrapped in warmth and each other's presence, the future felt less terrifying than it had in months. Alara thought about her father, probably warm in his house in town, surrounded by hired hands and business associates, and all the trappings of respectability. She thought about Silas Granger, who'd wanted to marry her for reasons that had nothing to do with who she actually was. She thought about the life she'd been running toward that night during the storm, uncertain and desperate and alone, and she thought about where she'd ended up instead. "Harley? Thank you for letting me be complicated, for not trying to fix me or smooth out the rough edges, for just accepting that I'm a mess who's trying to figure things out." "You're not a mess." I'm definitely a mess. Then we both are. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Seems like a good match. Alara smiled against his shoulder. Yeah, it really does. The winter deepened, and with it came challenges neither of them anticipated. The first was money. Alara had been conservative with the ranch accounts, building a small buffer for emergencies. But a brutal cold snap killed 3 head of cattle and damaged equipment they couldn't afford to replace immediately. The buffer disappeared in a week. We need to sell something, Alara said, going over the numbers for the 3rd time, hoping they'd somehow change. The south pasture, maybe. Or some of the equipment we're not using. The south pasture is our best grazing land, and we're using all the equipment, just not all at once. Harley leaned over her shoulder, frowning at the ledger. What about the timber rights? What timber rights? There's a section of old-growth forest on the northeast corner. Been meaning to log it for years, but never got around to it. Clayton Mills has been asking about it for a while. Might pay decent. Alara did quick calculations. How much do you think he'd pay? Enough to cover losses and then some. Then why haven't you sold already? Harley's expression went complicated. Because it's the last piece of land my father left me. Feels like losing something I can't get back. Alara understood immediately, not the practical logic, but the emotional weight. Sometimes what made sense on paper didn't translate to real life. We'll figure something else out, she said. There isn't anything else. Then we'll make it work with what we have. Cut expenses. Sell some of my things if we have to. You don't have things, Alara. You left with practically nothing. Then I don't know. We'll figure it out together, but I'm not making you sell your father's land if you're not ready. Harley looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her up from the chair and kissed her hard enough to communicate what words couldn't quite capture. Sell it, he said when they broke apart. My father would understand. This ranch matters more than sentiment. You sure? Yeah. He touched her face. Besides, you're right. We'll figure it out together. That's what partners do. They sold the timber rights to Clayton Mills for a fair price. It hurt more than Harley admitted, but he handled it with the same quiet strength he handled everything else. Alara watched him sign the papers and saw the cost in his eyes, even as he counted the money that would keep them afloat through spring. That night, she found him on the porch despite the cold, staring at the dark shape of the forest on the horizon. You okay? She asked, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. My father used to take me camping up there, taught me to track deer, read the stars, build fires that wouldn't smoke. Harley's voice was distant. Last time we went was 3 weeks before he died. Pneumonia took him fast. I'm sorry. Don't be. He had a good life. Lived on his own terms. He glanced at her. Would have liked you, I think. You're stubborn enough to match him. That a compliment? The highest one. Alara leaned against him, sharing warmth. We'll make something good with that money. Build something he'd be proud of. Already did, Harley said quietly. You're here. That's enough. The second challenge came in the form of Clara Morrison appearing at their door in early December, looking worried. There's talk in town, she said without preamble, accepting the coffee Alara offered. About you two. It's getting ugly. How ugly? Harley asked. Ugly enough that some of the church women are organizing. Want to run Alara out for, Clara made air quotes, corrupting public morals or some nonsense like that. Alara's stomach dropped. They can't actually do that, can they? Legally? No. But they can make your life hell, refuse service at stores, pressure other ranchers not to do business with you, start rumors that damage your reputation beyond repair. Clara looked between them. I've seen it happen before. Good people driven out because they didn't conform. Let them try, Harley said, voice flat. We don't need their approval. Maybe not, but you need their business. Their cooperation when you need help with roundup or barn raising or any of the dozen things ranchers help each other with. Clara set down her coffee. I'm not saying give in to pressure. I'm saying be smart about this. What do you suggest? Alara asked. Get married. The words landed like a stone in still water. Harley's expression went carefully neutral. That's not why we're together. I know, but it would stop the talk, make you respectable in their eyes, give Alara legal protection if her father tries anything else. Clara looked apologetic. I know it's not romantic, but it's practical. After Clara left, Alara and Harley sat in uncomfortable silence. You don't have to, Harley said finally. Marry me because of town pressure. That's the opposite of what we're building here. I know. So we ignore it. Let them talk. We've survived worse. Have we, though? Alara turned to face him. Because Clara's right. We need the community, even if we don't want to. Need their business, their cooperation. Can't run a ranch completely isolated. We've managed so far. Barely, and only because we got lucky with weather and cattle prices. She took a breath. I'm not saying we should get married just to please them, but maybe we should consider whether getting married makes sense for us, regardless of what they think. Harley's eyes searched her face. Is that what you want? I don't know, maybe. Alara laughed, frustrated. I'm 24. 6 months ago, I was running away from an arranged marriage. Now I'm considering choosing one. That feels complicated. Everything about us is complicated. True. But uncomplicated doesn't always mean better. Also true. Harley stood, paced to the window, back again. If we do this, if we get married, it has to be for the right reasons. Not because the town demands it, not because it's practical, but because we want to build a life together that's legally recognized and protected. Those sound like right reasons to me. You sure? Because there's no going back from this, Alara. You marry me, you're stuck with a hermit rancher who's terrible at conversation and worse at cooking. And you're stuck with a woman whose father disowned her and who can't shut up about proper accounting practices. Sounds terrible. The worst. They stared at each other across the kitchen, and despite the seriousness of the conversation, Alara felt laughter bubbling up. This is possibly the least romantic proposal discussion in history, she said. Wasn't proposing. Was discussing the theoretical logistics of a potential proposal. Very different. Completely different. So if you were proposing, theoretically, what would that look like? Harley moved closer, took her hands. It would look like me being honest. Saying that I love you. That I've probably loved you since you argued with me about the feed prices and refused to back down even when I got stubborn about it. Alara's heart stuttered. That's the first time you've said that. Said what? That you love me. Is it? He looked genuinely surprised. Been feeling it so long I thought I'd said it out loud before. You haven't. Well then. I love you, Alara Vance. Love your stubborn streak and your precise handwriting and the way you reorganize everything I own without asking permission. Love how you argued with your father even though you were terrified. Love that you choose to be here even though leaving would be easier. Tears prickled Alara's eyes. I love you too, in case that wasn't clear. It was. But hearing it still matters. So is this a proposal or still theoretical? Depends. Harley's grip on her hands tightened. You want a theoretical proposal or a real one? Real, Alara said without hesitation. Definitely real. Then marry me. Not because the town demands it, not because it's practical, but because I want to build a life with you that's legal and recognized and permanent. Because I want everyone to know you chose this, chose me, chose us. That's better. Better than theoretical? Better than anything I could have imagined 6 months ago. She kissed him instead of saying yes. But the kiss said everything words couldn't. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harley rested his forehead against hers. So that's a yes? That's a yes? Good. Because I have no idea what I would have done if you said no. Probably suffered in stoic silence while reorganizing the tool shed. Probably. They decided on a simple ceremony. No church, no crowd, just the county clerk, and whatever witnesses they could find who wouldn't judge. Clara Morrison agreed immediately, bringing her husband Thomas. The Hendersons from the neighboring ranch came too, surprising everyone. Figured you could use some friendly faces, Mrs. Henderson said, pressing a pie into Alara's hands. And anyone who tells Gerald Vance to go hang can't be all bad. The ceremony took 15 minutes. Alara wore the best dress she owned, nothing fancy but clean and pressed. Harley wore a suit that looked like it hadn't been out of the closet in years, but he cleaned up better than expected. When the clerk asked if she took this man, Alara looked at Harley and saw their entire future stretched out ahead. Hard winters and summer droughts. financial struggles and cattle losses, the judgment of a town that would probably never fully accept them. But she also saw partnership, honesty, the freedom to be exactly who she was without apology. "I do," she said clearly. Harley's "I do" was quieter, but no less certain. They signed the papers that made it legal, shook hands with witnesses, accepted congratulations that felt genuine despite the simplicity. And just like that, Elara Vance became Elara Crow. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing what they'd done. It was late afternoon, the winter sun already sinking toward the horizon, painting the snow gold and pink. "You okay?" Harley asked as they approached the house. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how 6 months ago I was running from a marriage I didn't want. And today I chose one that feels right." She looked at him. "That's a strange kind of full circle." "Good strange or bad strange?" "Good. Definitely good." Inside, they built a fire against the cold and made dinner together, Elara cooking while Harley set the table and tried not to get in the way. It was ordinary, domestic, exactly like 100 other evenings they'd spent together, except this time they were married. "Should we celebrate?" Elara asked over dinner. "Do something special?" "Like what?" "I don't know. Married people things?" Harley considered this. "We could finish those account books you've been working on." "That's your idea of celebration?" "You love organizing accounts." "I do, but that's not the point." Elara laughed. "We're hopeless, aren't we?" "Probably." He reached across the table, took her hand. "But we're hopeless together. That's got to count for something." "It counts for everything." Later, after dishes were cleaned and the fire banked for the night, they stood together looking out at the dark valley. Snow had started falling again, gentle flakes that caught the lamplight. "You ever regret it?" Elara asked. "Choosing this life? Being alone out here all those years?" "Used to, before you showed up, half frozen on my porch." Harley's arm came around her waist. "Now I just see it as the time I spent waiting for something worth keeping." "That's almost poetic." "Don't tell anyone. Will ruin my reputation as a stoic hermit." "Your secret's safe with me." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall, and Elara felt something settle deep in her bones. Not happiness exactly, too simple a word for something this complex. More like contentment, peace, the sense of being exactly where she belonged. She'd run from an arranged marriage straight into the home of Red Hollow's most feared man. She'd found shelter from the storm. Then she'd found work, partnership, respect, and finally, love. Not the desperate, consuming kind that burned bright and fast, but the steady, enduring kind that was built on honesty and choice and the daily decision to keep choosing each other. "Harley?" she said quietly. "Yeah?" "Before I showed up, before the storm, were you happy?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No, but I didn't know I wasn't happy. Just thought that's what life was. Getting through days, surviving. And now? Now I know the difference." He pulled her closer. "Between surviving and actually living." "Which one are we doing?" "Living," he said with certainty. "Definitely living." The snow continued falling, blanketing the valley in fresh white. Inside the house, the fire crackled and warmth filled every corner. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more judgment from a town that still didn't understand them. But tonight, Elara Crow stood in her husband's arms and knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Every single one of them. From running into the storm to accepting work, to standing up to her father, to saying yes to a man the whole county feared, but she knew was good. All the right choices, leading to exactly the right life. Spring came late that year, stubborn snow refusing to melt until well into March. But when it finally arrived, it transformed the valley overnight. Brown grass turning green, wildflowers pushing through mud, the creek running high and fast with snowmelt. Elara stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the hills gold and pink, one hand pressed against her stomach where new life was just beginning to make itself known. She hadn't told Harley yet, wanted to be certain first, wanted to wrap her mind around the fact that in 6 months, maybe 7, they'd be 3 instead of 2. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "You're up early," Harley said, coming up behind her with coffee. "Feeling all right?" "Fine." just couldn't sleep. She accepted the cup, held it without drinking. The smell made her vaguely nauseous these days, though she'd gotten good at hiding it. Bad dreams? No, good thoughts, actually. She leaned back against him, thinking about how different everything is from a year ago. Better different or worse different? Better. Definitely better. She paused. You ever think about the future? What we're building here? Every day. His arms came around her waist. Why? Just wondering what you see. 5 years from now. 10. Harley was quiet for a moment, considering. See this place thriving? Cattle operation expanded. Maybe some horses. The house fixed up proper. New roof, better barn, fences that don't need constant repair. That it? See us still here. Still choosing each other. Still figuring things out together. He kissed the top of her head. Why? What do you see? Same things mostly. Plus, maybe... She caught herself, not ready to say it yet. Maybe other changes. Good ones. You being mysterious on purpose? Maybe. He turned her around to face him, studying her expression. Something you want to tell me? Not yet. Soon. She smiled at his confused face. Give me a few more days to be sure. Sure about what? You'll know when I'm ready to tell you. Harley looked like he wanted to push, but he'd learned over the months to trust Alara's timing. If she said she needed a few days, she had her reasons. All right, he said, but I'm holding you to soon. Deal. They stood together watching the valley wake up, and Alara felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost knocked her sideways. A year ago she'd been trapped, desperate, convinced her life was over before it really started. Now she stood on land she helped manage, married to a man she'd chosen freely, carrying a future neither of them had planned, but both would welcome. If that wasn't proof that running into the storm had been exactly the right decision, nothing was. The news came 3 days later, not from Alara, but from town. Clara Morrison arrived mid-morning, looking troubled, which immediately put both of them on alert. Clara wasn't the type to show up unannounced unless something was seriously wrong. Gerald Vance collapsed yesterday, she said without preamble. Heart attack. Doc says it's bad. Alara felt the world tilt sideways. How bad? Bad enough they're not sure he'll make it through the week. Clara's expression was sympathetic. Thought you should know. In case you wanted to, well, in case. After Clara left, Alara stood in the kitchen staring at nothing while her mind raced in circles. Her father was dying. The man who'd raised her, protected her, controlled her, disowned her, dying in a bed in town while she stood here trying to figure out what she felt about it. You should go see him, Harley said quietly. He doesn't want to see me. Maybe not, but you might regret it if you don't try. What if he refuses? What if he... Alara's voice cracked. What if he dies still hating me for choosing myself? Then at least you tried. At least you can tell yourself you offered the chance at peace. Harley moved closer. And if he refuses, if he goes to his grave angry, that's on him, not you. Alara knew he was right, hated that he was right, because going back to town meant facing everyone who'd judged her, everyone who'd whispered behind her back, everyone who'd made it clear she was no longer welcome. But it also meant potentially making peace with her father before it was too late. Come with me? She asked. You sure? Might be easier without me there. Nothing's easier without you there anymore. She took his hand. Please? All right, let me hitch the wagon. The ride into Red Hollow was tense and quiet. Alara watched the familiar landmarks pass, the Morrison Ranch, the old mill, the fork in the road where she'd turned south during the storm instead of east toward freedom. Everything looked the same, but felt different, like she was seeing it through new eyes. Town was exactly as she remembered. Same buildings, same people, same judgmental stares when they recognized her climbing down from Harley's wagon. Mrs. Patterson actually gasped and hurried into the general store. Friendly as ever, Harley muttered. Let them stare. We're not here for them. Her father's house looked smaller than Alara remembered. Or maybe she'd just gotten used to the open space of the ranch, where the sky stretched forever and walls didn't close in quite so tight. She knocked, waited, almost turned around and left before anyone could answer. But then the door opened and there was Tommy Reeves, the young ranch hand who'd ridden with her father that night at Thornwell Ranch. Miss Van, I mean, Mrs. Crow. He looked genuinely glad to see her. He's in the bedroom. Doctor's with him now. How is he? Tommy's expression said everything. Not good. Been asking for you, though, between bouts of, well, he's been asking. Alara's heart clenched. He wants to see me? Won't say it outright, but he keeps mentioning your name, wondering where you are. If you're... Tommy glanced at Harley. If you're safe. I'm safe, Alara said quietly. Can I see him? Doc's orders are family only. Tommy looked uncomfortable. Sorry, Mr. Crow, but I'll wait out here, Harley said immediately. Take your time. Alara squeezed his hand once, grateful, then followed Tommy inside. The house smelled like sickness, that particular combination of sweat and medicine and fear that came with serious illness. Alara's stomach turned, though whether from the smell or nerves or the baby making its presence known, she couldn't say. Dr. Harrison emerged from the bedroom looking exhausted. He nodded to Alara without warmth, but without hostility either. He's weak. Don't tire him out, and don't expect miracles. He's not himself. Will he? Hard to say. Could be days. Could be hours. The doctor collected his bag. But if you have things to say to him, say them now. Don't wait. Alara steeled herself and walked into the room where she'd grown up, where her mother had died when Alara was 12, where her father had raised her alone and tried his best even when his best wasn't good enough. Gerald Vance looked small in the bed, diminished. His face was gray, skin stretched tight over bones that seemed more prominent than a week ago. His breathing was shallow and labored, but his eyes were open. And when he saw her, something flickered there. Recognition. Maybe relief. Alara, he rasped. You came. Of course I came. She sat in the chair beside the bed, hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. How are you feeling? Dying. He almost smiled. Don't need to pretend otherwise. I wasn't... She took a breath. I'm sorry you're sick. Not your fault. He shifted, winced, though the stress you caused probably didn't help. There it was, the guilt, the blame. Even dying, her father couldn't resist the dig. But Alara had learned something over the past year about accepting responsibility for her choices without accepting blame for other people's reactions to them. I'm sorry you were stressed, she said carefully, but I'm not sorry I left. Gerald's eyes sharpened. Still stubborn. Still myself. He was quiet for a moment, just breathing, each inhale seeming to cost him. You married him, the Crow man. I did. Why? Because I love him. Because he treats me like a partner instead of property. Because he lets me make my own choices. She met her father's gaze steadily. Because I wanted to. And you're happy? Truly. The question surprised her. Not the words, but the genuine curiosity behind them. Like Gerald actually wanted to know, not just confirm his own assumptions. Yes, Alara said honestly. Happier than I've ever been. Even though you lost everything, your inheritance, your family, your place in society. I didn't lose everything. I gained things that matter more. She paused. And I didn't lose my family, Dad. You chose to cut me off. I just chose not to come back. Gerald flinched at the word Dad. She hadn't called him that in almost a year. His hand moved on the blanket, restless. I was trying to protect you, he said finally. Your mother. When she died, I promised I'd make sure you were taken care of. That you'd never struggle or suffer or... His voice broke. Silas could have given you everything. Everything except choice. Everything except respect for who I actually am instead of who you wanted me to be. I wanted you to be safe. I know, but your version of safe felt like a cage. Alara felt tears prickling her eyes but refused to let them fall. I needed to build my own life, make my own mistakes, figure out who I am without you deciding for me. And who are you? Gerald asked. Without me deciding? I'm a woman who can manage a ranch's finances, who can birth calves and fix fences and argue with stubborn men who think they know better. She smiled despite the tears. I'm strong, capable, brave enough to stand up for myself. I didn't know any of that before I left. Gerald's eyes closed. Sounds like you didn't need me after all. No, I needed you to let me go. Alara reached out, took his hand. It was cold, papery, so different from the strong hands she remembered from childhood. And I needed to leave to realize I could survive on my own. Your mother would be proud of you, Gerald said quietly. She was stubborn too, drove me crazy. You loved her anyway. I did. More than anything. He opened his eyes, looked at Alara with something like wonder. You have her fire, her refusal to bend. I tried to protect you from that part of yourself because it scared me, but I was wrong. Alara's throat went tight. Dad, it's so... I'm sorry, he interrupted, for trying to control your future, for not listening when you said no, for cutting you off instead of trusting you'd figure things out. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I was scared of losing you. Lost you anyway. My own fault. You didn't lose me. I'm right here. Only because I'm dying. No, I'm here because you're my father, and I love you despite everything. She wiped her eyes with her free hand. And because I wanted you to know I'm all right, that I'm happy, that running away was the best decision I ever made, even though it hurt both of us. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then, you really love him? The Crow Man? His name is Harley, and yes, I really love him. He treats you well? Better than I knew to expect from a man. Good. Gerald's breathing was getting more labored. That's good. Dad, save your energy. Don't talk if it's too hard. Need to say this. Before, he coughed, winced. The ranch, my land. It's yours when I go. Put it in the will last month. Couldn't stand the thought of Silas getting it. Alara stared. You left me the ranch? After everything? You're my daughter, only family I have left. His eyes met hers. Maybe you'll sell it. Maybe you'll keep it. Your choice. But it's yours. Should have always been yours. Dad, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just promise me you'll keep being stubborn. Keep choosing yourself. Keep making that Crow Man earn your respect every day. I promise. And if you have children, Gerald paused, seemed to see something in her face. Are you? Alara hadn't planned to tell him, hadn't wanted to share something so precious with the father who'd cut her off. But looking at him now, dying and regretful and trying so hard to make peace, she couldn't hold it back. I'm pregnant, she said quietly. Just a few weeks. Haven't even told Harley yet. Gerald's entire face transformed. A grandchild. Yes. I won't... His voice cracked. I won't get to meet them. No, probably not. Alara's tears fell freely now. But I'll tell them about you, the good parts. How you loved their grandmother. How you tried your best even when you got it wrong. How you made peace at the end. You're kinder than I deserve. You're my father. That means something even when it's complicated. They sat in silence, hands clasped, while Gerald's breathing grew more difficult, and Alara tried to memorize this moment, the last real conversation she'd ever have with her father, flawed and painful and honest in ways they'd never managed when he was healthy. Alara, he whispered eventually. Yes? Thank you for coming, for giving me a chance to fix some of the damage. Thank you for letting me go, even though it took almost dying to do it. He almost laughed, ended up coughing instead. When he recovered, his eyes were closed and his breathing had evened out into something close to sleep. Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway. He needs rest now. You should go. Alara stood reluctantly. How long does he have? Days. Maybe a week if he's stubborn. The doctor's expression softened. I'll send word when it's time, if you want to be here. I do. Thank you. She left the room, left the house, left behind 18 years of complicated history, and walked into the sunlight where Harley was waiting on the porch. He took one look at her face and opened his arms. Alara walked into them and let herself cry properly. For her father, for the years they'd lost to stubbornness and control, for the peace they'd found too late. He's dying, she said against Harley's chest. I know. He apologized, left me his ranch, told me to keep being stubborn. Sounds like he finally figured some things out. Too late, though. Maybe, or maybe exactly on time. Harley pulled back enough to see her face. You gotta make peace. That matters. Alara nodded, wiping her eyes. I need to tell you something. All right. Not here. At home. She took his hand. Let's go home. The ride back was quieter than the ride in, but less tense. Alara felt wrung out, emotionally exhausted, but also lighter, somehow. Like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't know she had until it lifted. When they got back to Thornwell Ranch, she made coffee and sat Harley down at the kitchen table with the seriousness of someone about to deliver news that would change everything. You're scaring me, he said. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Something's different. Good different, probably. She took a breath. I'm pregnant. Harley went absolutely still. You're pregnant. About 6 weeks, I think. Haven't seen the doctor yet, but I'm sure. She watched his face anxiously. I know we didn't plan this. Know it's going to make everything more complicated, but Alara. He cut her off, voice rough. How do you feel about it? Terrified. Excited. Both at the same time. She met his eyes. How do you feel? Same. He reached across the table, took both her hands. We're going to have a baby. We are. A whole person that we made together. That's usually how it works. He laughed, sudden and surprised, and pulled her out of her chair and into his lap, holding her tight like he was afraid she might disappear. I don't have words for what this is, he said into her hair. Good overwhelming or bad overwhelming? Best kind of overwhelming. They sat like that for a long time, just holding each other while the magnitude of it settled in. A baby. A whole new life joining the one they'd built together. In 6 months or so, the house would have a third heartbeat, a third voice, a third person choosing this life. My father was happy, Alara said eventually, when I told him, sad he wouldn't meet them, but happy they'd exist. That a comfort? Yeah, a strange one, but yeah. She pulled back to look at Harley. He left me his ranch, in his will. Harley's eyebrows rose. That's significant. Very. Don't know what to do about it yet. Can't think about it until after. We'll figure it out. Together. Like everything else. Together, Alara agreed. I like the sound of that. Gerald Vance died 5 days later, peacefully in his sleep, according to Dr. Harrison. Alara wasn't there for the end. He'd slipped away in the early morning hours before anyone thought to send word. But she'd made her peace, said what needed saying, and that had to be enough. The funeral was small. Alara attended with Harley beside her, wearing black and accepting condolences from people who'd shunned her 6 months earlier, but now seemed willing to acknowledge her existence. Silas Granger approached after the service, hat in hand, looking genuinely sorry. I owe you an apology, he said quietly, for going along with your father's plans, for not asking what you wanted, for all of it. Thank you, Alara said, and meant it. But you were doing what you thought was right. We all were. Can't change the past, but we can learn from it. You're more gracious than I expected. Than I expected, too. She glanced at Harley. Turns out you learn a lot about yourself when you're allowed to make your own choices. After the funeral, the lawyer read Gerald's will. True to his word, he'd left everything to Alara. The ranch, the cattle, the equipment, everything. It was worth substantially more than Thornwell Ranch, though it was also in worse shape from months of Gerald's declining health and inability to manage properly. What do you want to do? Harley asked that evening while they looked over the property documents. I want to sell it, Alara said without hesitation. Use the money to expand our operation, fix up Thornwell proper, build something that's ours instead of inherited. You sure? It was your father's legacy. My father's legacy is complicated. The land is just land. She set down the papers. Besides, our child doesn't need 2 ranches. They need one strong one built on honest work and equal partnership. That's the legacy I want to leave. Equal partnership, Harley repeated. I like that. Good, because you're about to be equal partners in changing diapers and midnight feedings. Looking forward to it. Liar. Maybe a little. He pulled her close. But I'm looking forward to the rest of it. Teaching them to ride, read, stand up for themselves, showing them what it looks like when 2 people choose each other every day. That's the real inheritance, Alara said. Not land or money, but showing them what respect and choice and partnership actually look like. Think we can manage it? I think we'll mess up plenty, but we'll figure it out together. Together, Harley agreed. Always together. The months that followed were busy with preparation. They sold Gerald's ranch to a young couple from the east looking to start fresh. Alara saw something of herself in the woman's determined expression and practically gave them the place it cost. Use the money to build a new barn, repair the house properly, expand the herd. By the time autumn arrived, Thornwell Ranch was thriving in ways it never had before. The cattle operation was profitable. The books were immaculate. The house had been transformed from a bachelor's functional space into a real home. And Alara's belly had grown round and obvious, advertising the new life growing inside. She worked as long as Harley would let her, which wasn't as long as she wanted. He got protective and stubborn when she tried to do heavy lifting or ride the fence line alone. They argued about it regularly, usually ending with Alara agreeing to be careful and Harley agreeing to stop hovering quite so obviously. "You're worse than my father," she said one evening after he'd physically removed a bag of feed from her hands. "I'm protecting our child." "Our child is fine. I'm fine. Women have been having babies while working ranches for centuries. Not my wife. Not my child." "Harley Crow, I swear to—" He kissed her to cut off the argument, which was cheating and they both knew it, but it worked anyway. "I'm not trying to control you," he said when they broke apart. "I'm trying to make sure you're both safe." "I know, but you have to trust me to know my limits." "I do trust you. Doesn't mean I won't worry." "Fair enough, but the worrying has to be quiet worrying, not hovering and removing things from my hands. Can't promise quiet. Then we're going to have a long 6 months. Worth it, though." Alara couldn't argue with that. The baby came in late December during another snowstorm because apparently Alara's life had a theme about weather and significant events. The midwife barely made it through the drifts in time, arriving just as Alara's water broke and the first real contractions hit. Harley went pale. "You all right?" Alara asked between contractions, which was absurd because she was the one in labor. "Fine. Totally fine." He looked anything but. "Just, you're about to have a baby. Our baby. And I don't know how to— What if I— Harley." She grabbed his hand. "Breathe. I need you calm and present, not panicking." "Right. Calm, present." He took a deep breath. "I can do that." He couldn't, really. Spent the entire labor pacing and holding Alara's hand too tight and looking vaguely ill. But he stayed. Didn't leave even when the midwife suggested he might be more comfortable elsewhere. Just stood by Alara's side and let her squeeze his hand hard enough to hurt and told her she was doing great even when she cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place. When the baby finally arrived, a girl, healthy and loud and perfect, Harley cried. Actually cried, tears running down his face while he stared at the tiny person the midwife placed in Alara's arms. "We made a person," he said, voice cracking. "We did." Alara was crying too, overwhelmed and exhausted and more in love than she'd known was possible. "She's perfect. She's so small. She'll grow. What should we name her?" Alara looked down at her daughter, pink and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful in the way newborns are to their parents, and knew immediately. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Crow," Harley tested. "I like it." "Hope Crow," Alara repeated. "Welcome to the world, baby girl. Sorry about the snow." The baby, Hope, let out a wail that suggested she wasn't particularly sorry about anything. She was here, and she was announcing it to anyone who'd listen. Alara laughed through her tears and thought about how far she'd come. From desperate and running to settled and safe. From controlled and cornered to free and choosing. From alone to partnered to now. Impossibly, responsible for this tiny life that depended on her for everything. It should have been terrifying. It was terrifying. But it was also the most right thing Alara had ever experienced. That night, after the midwife had left and the three of them were alone, Harley sat beside the bed holding Hope while Alara rested. "You're a natural," she said, watching him cradle their daughter with surprising confidence. "She's easy, just sleeps and eats and makes faces. Wait until she's mobile, then talk to me about easy." "Fair point." He adjusted Hope's blanket. "You doing all right? That was— intense doesn't seem like a strong enough word." "I'm tired, sore, happy. Alara reached over to touch Hope's tiny hand. Grateful. For what? For all of it. The storm that brought me here, the job that let me stay, the partnership that turned into love. This. She gestured to encompass the three of them. This whole impossible, complicated, perfect life we built. Started with you being brave enough to run, Harley pointed out, and you being kind enough to offer shelter instead of turning me away. Turning you away wasn't an option. One look at you, soaked and desperate and determined, I was lost before I even knew your name. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said. Don't tell anyone. Reputation to maintain. Your secret's safe with me. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Hope sleep, and Alara thought about everything that had led to this moment. Every choice, every argument, every hard decision and uncertain step. Running from her father's house during a storm. Stumbling into Harley's home half frozen and terrified. Accepting work when she could have kept running. Standing up to Gerald when he came demanding her return. Choosing Harley not out of desperation but genuine love. Making peace with her father before he died. Every single choice had mattered, had led here, to this room, to this family, to this life she'd built piece by careful piece. You know what I realized? Alara said eventually. What's that? The town was right about you being dangerous. Harley looked surprised. How do you figure? You're dangerous to anyone who thinks control and ownership are the same as love. Dangerous to fathers who won't let their daughters choose. Dangerous to the idea that women need to be protected from their own decisions. She smiled. You're dangerous because you prove there's another way, partnership instead of possession, trust instead of control. Is that a compliment? The highest one. Then I'll take it. Harley shifted Hope carefully, leaned over to kiss Alara. Thank you. For what? For running into that storm. For being brave enough to stay. For choosing me when you had every reason not to. He looked down at Hope. For giving me a family when I'd convinced myself I was meant to be alone. You were never meant to be alone. You were just waiting for the right people to show up. Took them long enough. Worth the wait, though? Every second of it. Outside, the snow continued falling, blanketing the valley in white. Inside, by the fire, three people who'd found each other against impossible odds settled into the rhythm of being a family. It wouldn't always be easy. Alara knew that. There would be hard winters and financial struggles and sleepless nights with a colicky baby. The town would still whisper, still judge, still make their disapproval known in small cutting ways. But there would also be mornings waking up beside the man she'd chosen, evenings watching their daughter grow, years of building something real and honest and theirs. The storm that had nearly destroyed Alara's future had instead led her directly to the life she was meant to build. And standing there, sitting there actually, exhausted and sore and happier than she'd ever been, Alara understood something fundamental about courage and choice and what it meant to truly live. Sometimes the scariest decision is the right one. Sometimes running toward the unknown is braver than staying in the familiar. Sometimes the life you're supposed to have is nothing like the life you were told to want. And sometimes, if you're lucky and brave and stubborn enough to keep choosing yourself, you stumble into the arms of someone who sees you clearly and loves you anyway. Someone who gives you space to grow instead of a cage to inhabit. Someone who stands beside you instead of in front of you. Someone who proves that real partnership isn't about one person leading and the other following, but about two people walking side by side through whatever comes next. Harley had given Alara all of that, and she'd given it back to him. And together they'd created something neither could have built alone. A home. A family. A future built on respect and honesty, and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. That was worth running for. Worth fighting for. Worth building a whole life around. In the brutal frontier lands where survival often hardened people into stone, where expectations crushed individuality and control masqueraded as love, two lonely souls had proven something important. That courage and respect and genuine partnership could change everything. That the scariest choices sometimes led to the best destinations. That running from what doesn't serve you is just as brave as running toward what does. And that sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can do is show someone else what freedom actually looks like. Alara Crow, formerly Vance, forever herself, held her daughter close, and knew with absolute certainty that every difficult step had been worth it. The storm had passed. The life she'd built had just begun. And it was better than anything she could have imagined standing at that window a year ago. Wedding dress on, freedom calling, storm brewing. She'd answered that call, run toward the unknown, found herself in the process, and discovered that the most important person to choose in life wasn't a partner or a family or a future. It was yourself. Everything else just followed from there.